A quiet truth about human nature catches most people off guard. The harder someone tries to prove their worth, the easier it often becomes for others to overlook it. It sounds unfair, but it happens every day. A person who once appreciated your time suddenly becomes distant. Messages become shorter, effort becomes one-sided, conversations lose their warmth. The attention that once felt natural now feels like something you have to earn. And without even noticing it, many people fall into a trap that pushes the other person even further away. They give more attention, more energy, more explanations, more chances. They believe that if they can just show enough love, loyalty, patience, or understanding, everything will go back to the way it was before. But what if that approach is actually making the problem worse? There is a fascinating psychological reason why people sometimes stop valuing what has always been available to them. The human mind quickly adapts to familiarity. What once felt special can start feeling normal. What once felt important can begin to feel expected. This is why many relationships, friendships, and social connections slowly change over time, not because one person suddenly became less valuable, but because the dynamic changed in ways that often go unnoticed. The surprising part is that most people react in exactly the wrong way when this happens. Instead of increasing their value, their actions accidentally reduce it. Instead of gaining respect, they lose more of it. Instead of creating attraction, they create pressure. The good news is that there is a simple shift that can completely change the situation. It is not manipulation, it is not a mind game, it does not require sending a perfect message or using some secret psychological trick. In fact, it is so simple that many people ignore it because they think it cannot possibly work, yet the effects can begin much faster than most expect. Sometimes within just a couple of hours, people start noticing changes not only in the way others respond, but also in the way they see themselves. And that second change may be even more powerful than the first. In this video, you will discover why people stop valuing others, the hidden mistake that keeps many trapped in a cycle of chasing approval, the psychological principle that few people talk about, and the simple 2-hour shift that can completely transform the dynamic. You will also learn what usually happens after you apply it, why the outcome surprises so many people, and how this lesson can improve every relationship in your life. Most importantly, stay until the end because the final insight changes the way you look at attention, respect, and self-worth forever. It is a realization that many people spend years learning the hard way. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy deep psychology, human behavior, self-improvement, and powerful lessons that help you build stronger relationships and greater self-respect, make sure to subscribe and join us for more videos. Now, let's begin. The difficult part about being taken for granted is that it rarely announces itself. There is no warning message, no dramatic moment, no single day when everything suddenly changes. Most of the time, it happens so slowly that people do not notice it until the difference becomes impossible to ignore. At first, everything feels normal. The conversations flow naturally. Effort feels balanced. Appreciation feels genuine. Both people seem invested. Then small changes begin to appear, tiny shifts that seem harmless on their own. A delayed reply here, a canceled plan there, a little less enthusiasm, a little less curiosity, a little less effort. Most people dismiss these signs because they seem insignificant. They tell themselves that everyone gets busy, everyone has stressful days, everyone becomes distracted sometimes. And that is true. But when these small changes begin repeating over and over again, a pattern starts forming. The effort that once came naturally starts becoming one-sided. One person continues investing while the other slowly becomes comfortable receiving without giving the same energy back. This is where many people become confused. They start asking themselves difficult questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I change? Am I no longer interesting? Am I no longer attractive? Am I not enough? These questions feel logical because the human mind naturally searches for explanations. When someone becomes distant, people often assume that the problem must be hidden inside themselves. They begin examining every conversation, every interaction, every mistake, They search for the exact moment when everything went wrong, but often the truth is much simpler than that. Many times, the issue is not that your value decreased. The issue is that your value became predictable. Human beings adapt surprisingly fast. What once felt exciting becomes familiar. What once felt special becomes expected. What once felt rare becomes normal. This does not only happen with relationships, it happens with almost everything in life. A person dreams about buying a new car. For weeks they feel excited. A few months later the excitement fades. Someone moves into a beautiful house. At first it feels incredible. Eventually it becomes ordinary. The mind constantly adapts to what is available. Relationships are not immune to this process. When your attention is always available, people can become accustomed to it. When your support is always available, people can begin expecting it. When your kindness is always available, people can start seeing it as normal rather than valuable. That does not mean your kindness lost value. It means the other person stopped noticing it. There is an important difference. Many people spend years trying to become more valuable when the real problem is that their value has become invisible through constant availability. Think about how often people overlook things that are always there. The air they breathe, the electricity in their home, the water coming from the faucet. Nobody spends the entire day appreciating these things even though they are incredibly important, not because they lack value, because they are expected. The same principle can quietly affect relationships. A person who constantly gives attention may eventually find that attention receiving less appreciation than before, not because the attention became worthless, but because it became guaranteed. And once something feels guaranteed, people often stop recognizing its importance. This is where the emotional trap begins. The moment people sense that they are being valued less, their instinct is usually to increase effort. It feels like the logical solution. If attention is decreasing, give more attention. If affection is decreasing, show more affection. If communication is decreasing, communicate more. If appreciation is decreasing, try harder to earn appreciation. The intention is understandable. Nobody wants to lose a meaningful connection. Nobody wants to feel forgotten. Nobody wants to feel replaceable. But this instinct often creates the exact opposite result. Instead of restoring balance, it creates an unhealthy cycle. The more effort one person gives, the less effort the other person feels required to give. The more one person pursues, the less the other person feels the need to invest. Without realizing it, the relationship slowly becomes centered around one person's attempts to maintain connection. This is where many people start chasing reassurance. They want certainty. They want proof. They want confirmation that the relationship still matters. Again, this reaction is completely human. When people feel emotionally uncertain, they naturally seek stability. They want answers. They want clarity. They want relief from the anxiety created by distance. But reassurance seeking contains a hidden danger. At first, it seems harmless. A person asks if everything is okay. Then they ask again. Then they start monitoring responses more closely. Then they begin paying attention to every small change. How long did it take them to reply? Why was their message shorter? Why didn't they seem excited? Why didn't they ask questions? Why did they sound different today? The mind becomes trapped in constant analysis. Every interaction turns into evidence. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every delay feels meaningful. Soon, emotional energy becomes completely dependent on another person's behavior. A good response creates temporary relief. A cold response creates anxiety. A delayed response creates worry. Now, the emotional balance of one person's day depends entirely on someone else's actions. This is where people unknowingly surrender their power. Not power in the controlling sense, power in the emotional sense. The ability to remain stable regardless of another person's behavior. The more desperately someone seeks reassurance, the more important reassurance becomes. And the more important reassurance becomes, the weaker they feel without it. This creates a cycle that feeds itself. The person feels uncertain. They seek reassurance. The reassurance provides temporary relief. Then uncertainty returns. Then they seek reassurance again. Eventually, reassurance becomes a dependency rather than a solution. At the same time, the other person begins feeling something else. Pressure, even if they never say it directly. Pressure changes relationships. Pressure changes conversations. Pressure changes attraction. Pressure changes emotional dynamics because nobody enjoys feeling responsible for another person's emotional stability. People are naturally drawn toward individuals who appear emotionally secure. People feel comfortable around those who can stand on their own feet emotionally. Confidence is attractive partly because it signals independence. Security is attractive because it suggests stability. Self-respect is attractive because it communicates value without demanding validation. The opposite dynamic creates tension. When someone constantly seeks proof of their worth, they unintentionally communicate doubt about their own value. And people often respond more strongly to emotional signals than to words. A person may verbally say they are confident, but if their actions constantly ask for validation, the emotional message says something very different. This is why chasing attention often pushes attention further away, not because the person is cruel, not because they want to hurt you, but because the emotional dynamic changes. The connection begins feeling less natural and more forced, less balanced and more dependent, less free and more pressured. Many people spend months trapped inside this cycle. Some spend years. They keep trying different strategies, different messages, different explanations, different conversations, all while missing one critical truth. The problem is not always the other person's behavior, and it is not always your value. Sometimes the real issue is where your attention is directed, because attention is energy, and wherever attention goes, emotional investment follows. If all your attention remains focused on another person's actions, moods, responses, and decisions, your emotional state becomes tied to variables you cannot control. That is exhausting, it is draining, and eventually it becomes unsustainable. This leads to a question that changes everything. If chasing creates more distance, if reassurance creates more dependency, if over-focusing on another person creates more anxiety, then what should you do instead? The answer sounds almost too simple. In fact, most people hear it and immediately underestimate its power. Because when emotions are involved, the mind usually wants a complicated solution. It wants a perfect message, a clever strategy, a specific sentence that suddenly changes everything. It wants a breakthrough conversation that fixes the entire situation in a few minutes. But the shift that often creates the biggest difference is much smaller. For the next 2 hours, stop focusing on them completely. Not forever, not as punishment, not to play games, not to make them jealous. Just 2 hours. 2 hours where your attention returns to the one place it has been missing from, your own life. At first this sounds easy. Then people try it, and they discover how difficult it actually is, because many people do not realize how much mental energy they spend on someone until they attempt to stop. Suddenly they notice the habits. Checking the phone every few minutes, opening messages repeatedly, looking for signs of activity, wondering why there has been no response, replaying old conversations, predicting future conversations, creating imaginary scenarios, searching for clues, searching for reassurance, searching for certainty. All of this consumes attention, and attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. The strange thing is that most people guard their money carefully. They protect their time. They protect their possessions. Yet, They give away enormous amounts of attention without realizing it. Hours disappear thinking about people who are not thinking about them. Days disappear analyzing situations that have no immediate solution. Weeks disappear waiting for emotional clarity from someone else. The 2-hour shift interrupts this pattern. For 2 hours, stop monitoring, stop checking, stop analyzing, stop trying to solve the relationship, stop trying to predict what happens next, stop trying to decode every detail. Instead, redirect that attention somewhere productive. Read a book, exercise, work on a personal goal, learn a new skill, clean your environment, take a long walk, write your thoughts down, finish a task you have been avoiding, do anything that reconnects you with yourself. This is important because many people misunderstand the purpose. They think the goal is to make the other person miss them. That is not the goal. The goal is to stop losing yourself. There is a huge difference. When someone stops valuing you, the greatest danger is not losing them. The greatest danger is losing yourself while trying to keep them. Many people slowly abandon their routines, their goals, their interests, their peace of mind, their confidence, their focus. Everything becomes centered around one person. Everything becomes centered around one relationship. Everything becomes centered around one source of validation. And that creates emotional imbalance. Healthy relationships add value to your life. They should not become your entire life. The moment one person becomes the center of your emotional universe, you become vulnerable in ways you may not realize. Every action they take affects you. Every mood affects you. Every response affects you. Every absence affects you. That is not emotional connection. That is emotional dependence. The 2-hour shift begins breaking that dependence, not through force, not through denial, through redirection. Each minute spent improving yourself is a minute not spent feeding anxiety. Each minute spent creating something is a minute not spent chasing certainty. Each minute spent reconnecting with your own life weakens the emotional grip that uncertainty has on you. Something interesting begins happening during this process. The emotional intensity starts decreasing, not because the situation changed, because your perspective changed. Distance creates perspective. When your face is pressed against a painting, you cannot see the entire picture. You only see fragments. Colors, shapes, small details. Step back a few feet and suddenly everything becomes clearer. Relationships work the same way. Constant emotional involvement often prevents objective thinking. People become trapped inside their feelings. Every emotion feels like reality. Every fear feels like truth. Every assumption feels accurate. But psychological distance creates clarity. The more space you create between yourself and the emotional storm, the more clearly you begin seeing what is actually happening. Sometimes you realize you have been overthinking. Sometimes you realize you have been exaggerating certain fears. Sometimes you realize the relationship is healthier than you assumed. But other times you notice something completely different. You begin seeing reality without excuses, without wishful thinking, without emotional distortion. You begin recognizing patterns that were hidden before, patterns you ignored because you wanted a different outcome. This is where many people experience an uncomfortable realization. They discover that they have been investing far more than they have been receiving. Not occasionally, consistently. They realize they have been carrying the entire connection. They realize they have been making excuses for behavior that would never be acceptable from anyone else. They realize they have been accepting less than they deserve simply because they were afraid of losing someone. These realizations are not always pleasant, but they are valuable because truth creates freedom, even when the truth hurts. The opposite is also true. Illusions create suffering, especially when people spend months trying to maintain relationships that only exist in their imagination. The 2-hour shift strips away some of those illusions. It allows reality to become visible again. And once reality becomes visible, new possibilities emerge. This is where things become interesting, because one of two outcomes usually begins developing, and perhaps that is the lesson most people spend years trying to learn. When someone stops valuing you, the answer is not to become louder. It is not to chase harder. It is not to explain yourself again and again. And it is not to spend your days trying to convince someone of what should already be obvious. Because real value does not come from being noticed. Real value exists whether someone notices it or not. The moment another person's attention becomes the measure of your worth, you give away something that was never theirs to control. Your peace, your confidence, your self-respect, and the longer you chase appreciation, the further you move away from the one person who needs your attention the most, yourself. So if someone stops valuing you, take a step back, not out of anger, not out of revenge, not to make them jealous. Do it because you deserve to remember who you are outside of their opinion. Focus on your goals. Focus on your growth. Focus on building a life that feels meaningful with or without their approval. Because sometimes they come back. Sometimes they notice the change. Sometimes they finally recognize what they almost lost. But sometimes they don't. And that is okay too. Because the greatest victory was never getting them to see your value. The greatest victory was seeing it yourself. The truth is, the people who carry the strongest presence are rarely the ones begging to be appreciated. They are the ones who understand their worth even when nobody is applauding. They are the ones who keep moving forward, keep growing, keep building, keep becoming, and in the process, they stop seeking validation and start living with self-respect. So the next time someone stops valuing you, remember this: do not panic, do not beg, do not prove, do not chase. Pause the pursuit. Return to yourself, because the most powerful shift is not making someone realize your value. It's realizing your value before they do. And maybe the moment you stop fighting to be appreciated is the exact moment you remember that you were valuable all along. If this video gave you a new perspective, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. And if you enjoy content about psychology, human behavior, self-respect, confidence, and emotional strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Thank you for watching. And remember, the right people will appreciate your value, but first you must learn to appreciate it yourself.